What you have in front of you in terms of this dawah manual, this is something coming from the Qatar Guest Center where I work in Qatar, where we have set up this dawah training course. Usually it runs for 9 days, 2 hours each day in the evening, taking professionals from different walks of life and giving them the necessary training, basic training to be able to do dawah, amongst the non-Muslims that are many there. So what we're looking at is something very condensed. Means I won't be able to go over it with the kind of depth that we do it there. So it means I'm going to be skimming, be touching main points, and the material is there in your hands. It's for you to read and get more depth out of it. This is the main point. The other point to note that we do, when we do this course, we have assignments that we give the people who participate in the course. If you go to page 5, you'll say this is a page for course assignments. And obviously some of them are not going to be relevant to you because it's talking about weekly assignments, etc. And we're doing everything in 2 days, a few hours over 2 days. But one which is I think relevant to you all is that between today and tomorrow, I would like you each to prepare a da'wah plan, a plan for da'wah, wherever you are, whatever area of work you're involved in, or study, or whatever, for you to lay down a plan of how you would consistently be involved in da'wah, right? And this is as a part of an exercise for you to try to utilize what you have now. After we've finished the course, you can try to modify that and see how you can improve it. Also those issues that you are faced with, we can try to answer some of them in the question sessions. So by trying to develop a da'wah plan, the issues that you may not have thought of just sitting in the class, would come up. You would have an idea that I'm faced with this. How do I do this? How can I do da'wah in this circumstance or that circumstance, etc. So this is very important. And of course, this is following the basic, managerial principle. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail, right? So you have some plan. You're going to give da'wah. You need to have worked out some plan for that da'wah. If you're just going to go out and do it as it comes, likely your da'wah is going to be weak. It will not have the kind of consistency it would if you actually planned it out. The other thing, again, it's quite difficult for you to do it between now and tomorrow, but if you can, before the end, tomorrow's between today and tomorrow, if you can, at least try to meet one non-Muslim, right, and try to give them da'wah, and make a record of your encounter. If you go on page 105, right, this is at the end of the book, second last page from the end of the book. There is a da'wah encounter evaluation sheet where you try to give da'wah to a non-Muslim and you record your experience, right? And this you can make other photocopies of and try to record what you're doing. So you can check yourself, see your own improvement, check your progress. Actually, this is, if there is a system here or there, we have a committee which goes back and looks over these things. We meet, after a month's time, and people give up their evaluations, and we see, how things are going, how we can help them, etc. But maybe this society, the Ansar committee, they can try to develop this further, to keep tabs with people and their progress in the field of da'wah. Because of course, any of these kind of things that we do, you want some follow-up. It's not, it's useless to just do something. It's, everybody's hyped up, wonderful today, and then after some time it will peter out. If there is no follow-up, there should be some kind of follow-up for those people who have attended the course, how they're doing now, how they're progressing, what problems they're facing, how can we resolve it, who can you cooperate with? Because oftentimes, da'wah, trying to do it as an individual, it has its own drawbacks. Whereas trying to do it, with other people who are in the same field or in similar fields, this will help to give you greater success in your da'wah. And of course, success ultimately is with Allah. The last point, which has to do with conversion stories. I mean, we will have some people give their conversion stories tomorrow, but between now and then, or shortly thereafter, you can go to different websites like sultan.org, islamworld.net, mentioned there, and look at the conversion stories, of what I would say 10 recent converts. I mean, there are stories which are about people who converted to Islam 50 years ago, and not those, but those who have recently converted within the last 10 years or 5 to 10 years, to go and read them and identify what was the turning point in each person's story. What was the point which caused that person to become a Muslim? Look at that point and just make a note of it in a short paragraph or whatever, what was that turning point? And how would I utilize that turning point in my da'wah? Right? So you're not just reading stories for the entertainment, very nice story, but what practical use is it? How can I utilize that? How can I cater my da'wah to utilize that particular point? So this is what I would ask you to do for yourselves and also for the course. The first topic is that of the da'wah itself, as an introduction to da'wah. Understanding, basically, that's the first section, deals with the obligation of da'wah, to understand that it is not just something which is sunnah. That people categorize da'wah, oftentimes they look at it as being something which is sunnah. If you do it, you get reward, but if you don't do it, no harm. But the point is that the term sunnah includes also things which are obligatory. It's from the sunnah, for example, from the Prophet ﷺ. He has told us from the sunnah that in terms of our obligatory acts, say Salatul Eid, attending Salatul Eid. You'll not find it in the Quran anywhere, right? But Salatul Eid, the obligation of its attendance, comes from the Sunnah. And so we can say it is from the Sunnah, but it is from the Sunnah which identifies what is obligatory. So from the Sunnah there is what identifies what is obligatory, what is recommended, what is permissible, what is disliked, and even what is haram. The Sunnah will identify for you things which are haram, which you may not find in the Quran. Eating of birds of prey, for example. It's not in the Quran. It is from the Sunnah that it is identified. So this term Sunnah, there are two meanings of it, and people mix up these meanings. When you're using it, one context, it means something that the Prophet ﷺ said, did, or approved. And something which is good to do. If you do it, you're rewarded. If you don't do it, there is no punishment. See, these are technical terms used in two different fields. One is in the science of hadith, it has a particular meaning. One is in the science of fiqh, right? Islamic law, it has another meaning. So it is important to understand that this term sunnah is not an excuse for not to do da'wah, right? That in fact the da'wah was the methodology of the prophets. That was their lives. That was their life's mission, was da'wah, conveying the word of Allah to humankind. And Allah praises those who do it throughout the Quran. There are many verses mentioned here, regarding it. وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَى إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Who is better in speech than one who calls to Allah and does righteous deeds and says, indeed, I'm among the Muslims. Allah praises the one who calls to Allah. Highly praise. And the Prophet ﷺ, of course, had mentioned that whoever calls to guidance will receive the same reward as the one who follows him, without any decrease in the reward of his followers. It's a basic principle. Anybody who accepts Islam, or anybody who finds their way to Islam as a result of your effort, then you will get reward from whatever that person does. And of course, each and every one of us on the day of judgment will be in need of whatever good deeds we can find. And alhamdulillah, this is a massive source of good deeds. We will see coming for us, we'll wonder where it came from. Because you do that good and you don't know the consequence where it goes. Ultimately you do the best that you can, and inshallah that can be multiplied many, many times over for you. Anyway, the point is that da'wah, as I said, is an obligation. It is an obligation basically according to one's ability. Though scholars have divided it into different categories, what they call the individual obligation or fard ain, and the community obligation or fard kifaya. Scholars have divided it into these two categories. However, the reality is that it is today fard ain, an individual obligation. And scholars like Sheikh bin Baz, he said very clearly, in looking at this, that at a time when there is a shortage of callers, when evil is prevalent and ignorance dominates, sounds like our times, right? Da'wah becomes fard ain on everyone according to their ability. It becomes fard ain for everyone according to their ability. So we cannot find any excuse not to give da'wah. And there are so many different ways. Actually, in the book there's one section on tips for da'wah. Actually, it's called, it's on page 50 through page 57, called More Than 80 Ways to Make Da'wah. More than 80 ways to make da'wah. For all the different circumstances, at school, at home, the workplace, wherever. There are many, many tips here. Really, there's so many different ways. But what happens is that people don't stop and think about it, don't stop and analyze it. You just say, well, I'm in a class, non-Muslim students are with me for a minute and they're gone. How can I give da'wah? They don't stop and think out, in a day, where do I meet non-Muslims? How many times do I meet them? What are the different ways to give da'wah? Is it only just talking to people? No. It could be giving them a pamphlet, giving them a brochure. Anyway, the point is that, as we said, today it is an obligation on each and every one of us. And the Prophet ﷺ, so as for a person not to say, well, according to ability, I don't have any ability, my knowledge of Islam is very weak, etc. Prophet ﷺ said, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, convey whatever you've learned from me, even if it's only one verse from the Quran. And each and every one of us knows قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ is the essence of the message. It is the solution to the problems of all of these other religions and communities, etc. Because they don't know قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. Now, you might think that قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ means, say, He, Allah, is one. But that's not what it means. Ahad doesn't mean one. It means uniquely one. And there's a difference, because Allah could have said قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ وَاحِدٌ, and wahid is one of the names of Allah, al-wahid. But that's not the term He used here. He used ahad, and there is a fine distinction between ahad and wahid. What is that distinction? I can say, I have one book here, wahid, kitab wahid. But you can also have one book, she can also have one book, many different people can have one book. But when I say I have one book using the term ahad, it means one book like which there is no other, uniquely one. And this is the essence of the message, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, that Allah is uniquely one. To convey that, the rest of the surah, Allahu Samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad, all of that is explanation of ahad. So the essence of that surah, which the companions and others used to call it Surah Al-Tawheed, we know it as Surah Al-Ikhlas, but they used to call it commonly Surah At-Tawheed. They call it Surah Al-Ikhlas also, but Surah At-Tawheed, because it has the essence of the message of Tawheed. So powerful that the Prophet ﷺ said that it's equivalent to a third of the Quran. If we were to divide the Quran into three parts, its meanings into three parts, Qul Huwallahu Ahad identifies one whole section of the Quran. Right? So everybody has that. So nobody can say, I can't give dawah to that. Qul Huwallahu Ahad. No excuse. Furthermore, in order to stress that this is not just a recommendation, you find in both the Quran and the Sunnah a curse placed by Allah on those who don't give da'wah. Those who have the means, who have the knowledge, and they don't convey the message, they are cursed by Allah. And we can find that in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 159, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُمُونَ مَا أَنزَلْنَا مِنَ الْبَيِّنَاتِ وَالْهُدَى مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا بَيَّنَّاهُ لِلنَّاسِ فِي الْكِتَابِ أُولَٰئِكَ يَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّهُ وَيَلْعَنُهُمُ اللَّاعِنُونَ. Indeed, those who hide the clear messages and guidance that I have revealed after I have made it clear to the people in the scripture, those are cursed by Allah and cursed by all who would curse. And the Prophet ﷺ had said, Man katama ilman mimma yanfa'u Allahu bihi fi amri nasi amri din aljamahu Allah yawm al-qiyamah bilijamin min nar. Whoever hides knowledge by which Allah benefits people in their affairs, of their religion, Allah will bridle him on the day of resurrection with a bridle from the hellfire. This is serious. And it's one of the basic principles in usul al-fiqh, that if the consequence of an action is that one receives punishment from the hellfire as a bridle is what you put on a horse to control him, right? If the consequence is the hellfire, an element of the hellfire, then it means that that act is haram. So it is haram not to give da'wah when one is able. Now, of course, one may say, I'm not really hiding knowledge, because when we think of hiding knowledge, we think in terms of somebody coming to you and say, can you tell me about Islam? And you say to them, no. I don't think you deserve to know about Islam because, you Britishers are involved in Iraq and killing our Muslim brothers, so I'm not going to tell you about Islam. Okay, that's obviously hiding the knowledge. That's kitmanul ilm in the obvious sense. And of course, that's not permissible. Not permissible. But there is indirect hiding. Indirect hiding means that you had the means. This is a person who studies with you in the university. You've known them for the last 4 years. You studied throughout the university, you knew them. They're in all your classes. You talk to them about homework. You talk to them about everything under the sun except for Islam. You have hidden the knowledge. You had all the means, but you hid that knowledge. And of course, on the day of judgment, that person will curse you. That person, when Allah calls up that person for judgment, that person will curse you, will ask Allah, double that person's punishment. So, the obligation of conveying the message of Islam is not something to be taken lightly. And of course, some people, as a shortcut, will say, well, actually, giving da'wah is being taken care of. We have Jamaat Tabligh. Jamaat Tabligh, that's Jamaatul Da'wah. They're doing the da'wah. So therefore, the obligation on the individual has been taken care of because Jamaat Tabligh is doing it. But it's enough for us to recognize that the methodology of Jamaat Tabligh is to call Muslims only. They tell their followers, this is their philosophy, their approach, don't go and call the non-Muslims. Call the Muslims. Why? Because if you invite a non-Muslim into Islam today, and Muslims are in such bad shape, it will drive them out. So you need to clean up your house before you invite anybody in. This is the philosophy. Of course, it sounds quite logical, quite reasonable. However, that was not the methodology of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That was not his methodology. He called everybody. Whether you're a Muslim, after you became became a Muslim, or whether you are a non-Muslim, he gave the da'wah. So da'wah is not restricted and should not be restricted to any one group. Even if, for example, we say, okay, we're focusing on non-Muslims, which was, the methodology of the Prophet ﷺ, and a Muslim comes along, right? And you say, well, no, my focus is on non-Muslims, so I'm not going to deal with you. Well, of course, remember in the Quran, Allah said what? Abasa wa tawalla. What is that surah all about? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, wanting to deal with a group of leaders of the non-Muslims, a Muslim came to him, needed some da'wah, and he turned away. What did Allah do? Allah chided him. You shouldn't have done that. Give the man the message. In fact, he has the first right to it. So for our da'wah, it is not limited to any one group. Some people try to make a distinction between da'wah and what they call islah. We use da'wah when we're calling non-Muslims and islah when we're calling Muslims. But really, this is a technical definition which they have made, which is not really from the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Sahaba, etc. They use da'wah to cover everything. If you want to make that distinction in terms of your own program, there's no harm. It's not to say you're doing a bid'ah, something evil, etc. But know that ultimately, according to Arabic language, da'wah includes both. Because it's ad-da'wah ilallah. That is what the full translation of or term is, ad-da'wah ilallah. And actually we've now entered into the characteristics of the call. Ad-da'wah ilallah. That is the full term. Calling to Allah. That's what the da'wah is to. Da'wah is not to my group, the Ansar, or Hizb ut-Tahrir, or whatever. Where people who get caught up into groupism, their da'wah ends up being to groups. So the first thing you tell a person when they're coming into Islam, you're calling them to Islam, or they just came into Islam, which group are you going to join? Our group, right? This is the group. We're the ones who called you. You should join our group, right? So no, they're not calling to Allah anymore. You're calling to your group, or you're calling to a madhab, or you're calling to This is not the da'wah. The da'wah is calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to Islam as it was revealed. Islam as it was revealed. So what does that mean? If we're calling to a madhab, and some people unfortunately will call to a madhab. You come into Islam, they'll say to you, listen, you have to follow a madhab. Best madhab to follow is the Hanafi madhab. Why? Because most Muslims are Hanafis. Most Muslims are Hanafis. That's the biggest group. So better you become a Hanafi. No, we have to say to them, what was the madhab of Abu Huraira? He was a Hanafi. What about the madhab of Abu Hanifa? Was he a Hanafi? If you asked Abu Hanifa, what was your madhab? You think he would say, I'm a Hanafi? No, he wouldn't. Imam Malik, Imam Shafi'i, were they going to say, I was a Shafi'i, I was a Maliki? No. None of them would say that. What would be their answer? What is the answer of the Sahaba? What is the answer of the Tabi'een, the great Imams? What were their answer when you asked them, what was your madhab? Tell me. What was the madhab of the Sahaba? It was the madhab of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is Quran, Sunnah, etc. No, but we say it is the madhab of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was the madhab they were following. They were trying to follow the way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that's what we call to. That's what they call to. That's what we should be calling to. The way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is embodied in the Quran and the Sunnah. But it is not just the Quran and the Sunnah, but the Quran and the Sunnah as it was understood by the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the great Imams, etc. Not the Quran and the Sunnah as you understand it, because if we were to hear the Quran and the Sunnah as Hizb ut-Tahrir understands it, then we have something else. You have a movement which is denying the Adhab al-Qabr. And then they say we follow Quran and Sunnah. Or even the Qadianis. They say we follow Quran and Sunnah, but they say Muhammad ﷺ wasn't the last of the prophets. Right? So, just saying I follow Quran and Sunnah is not enough in terms of understanding. Yes, I can say I follow the Quran and Sunnah. That's perfectly legitimate. But what do you mean by that? The Quran and Sunnah as understood by whom? By you? Because you have people today doing that too. You know? You have some sisters who follow the Quran and who say they follow the Quran and Sunnah, and who are saying, well, you know, we need a female tafsir of the Quran. You know, because all the mufassirun, all those who made tafsir of the Quran, they're all men. So they made tafsir from a men's perspective. We need today, in our times, we need a female mufassir. I mean, as if a female mufassir who is following the way of the early generations is going to come up with a different tafsir. You know? But this is the modern understanding, the individual understanding. So we say that the da'wah itself is a da'wah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not to a madhab, etc. As Sheikh bin Baz had mentioned, the way of Allah, the mighty and majestic, is submission, the straight path, the religion of Allah which He sent His messenger with. Therefore, this is what must be called to, not the madhab of such and such a person, nor the opinion of any individual. The way of Allah is that which the noble Quran and the pure authentic Sunnah of the Messenger ﷺ directs one to. It is necessary for the Muslim missionary, Muslim caller to Allah, to call people to the whole of Islam, and not to cause division among them, nor to be a blind follower of any madhab, a tribe, a sheikh, or a leader. Rather, his aim should be to affirm and clarify the truth and establish people upon that truth, even if it contradicts the opinion of such and such a person or so and so. So this is the essence of the da'wah. It is to the way of the Prophet ﷺ as it was understood by the early generations. And of course, there are a number of different references that the Prophet ﷺ made to that way. Because you find people say, well, you know, in Islam, there are many ways. Why should we restrict things to one way? There are many ways. But actually, if you listen to that argument, that is like the argument of those who say there are many ways to Allah. You have people out there who say there are many ways to Allah. Even some people who call themselves Muslims. They are known as the perennialists. Perennialists who have headquarters here in the UK. You know, the Islamic Text Society. If you've seen, or if you know that group, I mean, they promote this idea. This idea that all religions, really, as long as you're sincere, you're on a path to Allah. That religions in relationship to Allah is like a wheel. It has spokes and a hub in the middle. All the spokes lead to the hub. So if you're a sincere Buddhist, true sincere Buddhist, or you're a sincere Christian, or you're a sincere Hindu, whatever, or Muslim, you're all headed to Allah. Of course, we reject this. وَمَنْ يَبْتَغِي غَيْرَ الْإِسْلَامِ دِينًا فَلَنْ يُقْبَلَ مِنْهُ. Allah says very clear, whoever accepts a religion other than Islam, whoever takes other than Islam as his or her religion, it will not be accepted from them. Finish. There is only one way. There's only one religion. So as there's only one God, and there's only one human race, that's why we don't need many religions. For all those people out there in the da'wah field, you run into people who say, well, you know, what's wrong? You know, we're all believing in God, we're all doing good things, so and so and so. You know, why do you want to restrict? Why is it only your religion? No. Because God only provided one religion for people. He didn't want confusion. He's not the author of confusion. So human need is one. From the time of Adam to the last person of this world, human nature will not change. The needs for human beings will remain the same. So we only need one religion. So God only revealed one religion. So as there's one God, one human race, there's only one religion, and there's only one way to follow that religion. There's not many ways, because again you're ending up in confusion. There's only one way to follow it. But that way, we have unfortunately today some people who want to make that way so narrow, it's like a thread. If you just put your foot slightly to the side, you're off. you know, and then you're maligned and attacked and you're deviant and this, that and the other. They have made that way so narrow that if they were to apply that way to the Sahaba, they would be cutting Sahabas off the manhaj. Sahaba, Tabi'een, Imams, left and right, all the way down. Because they have gone to the other extreme. Yes, it is one way, but it is a broad way. It does allow for differences amongst in issues that may be issues of Aqidah. Say, people say, no, it's differences in fiqh. We will not allow differences in Aqidah. And why not? Sahaba differed over some issues of Aqidah. They did differ. And so did the Tabi'een. And so did the Imams, etc. They differed over issues of fiqh. They differed over issues of Aqidah. Differences will exist, but they are not fundamental differences. Nobody was differing whether Allah is one or not. No. Nobody is differing whether Salah is wajib 5 times a day or not. No. There are basic issues of the deen. There are no differences. But there are secondary issues related to both Aqidah and fiqh about which people differed from the time of the Sahaba. That's reality. So if we can accept from the time of the Sahaba some differences, then we should be able to accept them today also. That's the bottom line. That we have a level of tolerance which will allow for differences. You know, it is one way, it is one path, and we know it's not one just based on our own desires. It is one based on knowledge. So we find, for example, the Prophet ﷺ saying, هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة. This is my path, and I call to Allah with clear knowledge. Clear knowledge. على بصيرة. Calling to Allah with what is clear. So we don't call to Allah based on doubts, on things which we are unclear about ourselves, supposition, maybes, possibly. No, we call to Allah based on what is clear. So that is essential principle in the calling to Allah. And of course, when we call to Allah, call people to Allah, meaning calling them to the religion of Allah, the religion of Allah has a variety of elements, and we have to put these elements in some kind of an order of priority. What do we call them to first? And we know Prophet ﷺ, when he sent Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen, he said, إِنَّكَ تَقْدَمُ عَلَى قَوْمٍ أَهْلِ كِتَابٍ فَلْيَكُنْ أَوَّلَ مَا تَدْعُوهُمْ إِلَيْهِ أَنْ يُوَحِّدُوا اللَّهَ تعالى. You'll be going to Christians and Jews. So the first thing that you should invite them to is the assertion of the oneness of Allah. So that is the core message. That should be what we focus on. However, that doesn't mean that in every conversation you have with anybody calling them to Islam, it has to be on the oneness of Allah. Somebody comes and asks you about hijab. Why do Muslim women cover themselves up? You know, why are you forcing, to men they will say, why are you forcing your women to cover themselves up? Or to women, why do you women allow men to force you to cover yourselves up? You cannot ignore their question and say, listen, Allah is one. Right? This is what you need to know. Don't worry about why we do this or why. No, you need to know Allah is one. Well, that's true. They do need to know Allah is one. But in the course of giving da'wah, you must deal with the questions that they raise. You fulfill what they are trying to get clarity on, and then you try to bring that back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because of course when you describe hijab, you will describe the purposes of hijab, which Allah has then identified in the Quran. So you take it back to Allah ultimately. But you must deal with what is in front of you. But you have an idea, you have a focus. What is the most important point that I need to get to this person? What is going to save them on the Day of Judgment? Whether they accept hijab or they don't accept hijab, you might find a nun, right? A Catholic nun who accepts hijab. Wonderful, beautiful. But she's on a path to hell. So it's not accepting hijab or not accepting hijab is not going to necessarily make a difference whether a person makes it to paradise or not. But what will make the difference is whether they believe in the oneness, the unique oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we also find, a good example of that in the case of Prophet Yusuf, in the prison, when the people were with him and they asked him to explain their dreams for them. He took that opportunity while explaining their dreams for them to call them to the oneness of Allah. Same thing with Prophet Isa as a child, when his mother brought him to the people and they were shocked. They're questioning her, how could you do this? You're a righteous woman. Your mother was a righteous woman. How could you do this? And she pointed to Prophet Isa. He dealt with it. He clarified that his mother was a righteous woman, but he used that opportunity to call them to the oneness of Allah. So that is the unique oneness of Allah, is the main goal. Actually, the first two chapters, you have questions on page 10 and page 15. Those are for you to go over just to make sure you have caught what you're supposed to catch from that. We're calling people to Islam, and we have to be aware of certain issues concerning them. We have a context. As we said, we don't call by just saying Allah is one. Everybody you go to, Allah is one, Allah is one, Allah is one. No matter what circumstance you find yourself in, you're saying to people Allah is one. It's true, but that message has to be brought in a way which is suitable for that particular circumstance that you're calling to. And we have to, even before looking at how do we cloak that message, how do we present that message in such a way that it will effectively reach people, we have to keep our basic objectives in sight. The issue is, are we trying to convert people, or are we communicating with them and conveying a message? We have to have that clear. Because if in our minds da'wah means your main program is converting people, then of course when you get out there and you try to convert people, most people will not convert. So you will feel failure. You will feel a failure. You will feel within yourself weakness, and I'm useless, I can't do this, and you will quit because you had the wrong idea in mind. Whereas if you know that the responsibility is what? Tabligh. Not tabligh al-jamaat. Jamaat tabligh, no, but tabligh meaning conveying the message. Tabligh al-risala. That this is what the essence of it is, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَهُوَ أَعْلَمُ بِالْمُهْتَدِينَ. Indeed, you cannot guide whom you love, but Allah guides whom He wills. He's telling Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that. And who are we? Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not able to guide Abu Talib, so close to him, who protected him, who raised him, who gave his own child to him to raise. He couldn't guide him. So then what? As Allah told the Prophet ﷺ, وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينُ. The only obligation on the messenger is to give the clear message. That is the obligation. Giving the clear message. So, if we understand that, then that takes a weight off our backs, takes a big burden from us. We're not now having to convert people. We're just about trying to get that message across. And to get it across effectively and well. Right? So, there are some principles that we should keep in mind when we are trying to get across that message effectively. First of the principles is listen before you speak. Listen before you speak. Meaning what? Meaning, yes, you have a message you want to tell people, but if your approach is just, as soon as you meet a person, you just ramble on, you just give them you're a preacher, you're out there giving them the whole story. You don't have any idea what their ideas are, what their issues are, so on. So you're just coming and telling them, So what happens? You're out there, you're telling a Jehovah's Witness that God didn't have a son, Jesus is not the Son of God, and all this. After you talk to him for 1 hour, he tells you, guess what? I didn't believe that Jesus had a son. Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe that Jesus had a son. That God had a son. That Jesus was created. He was created. Yes, they're using the term son, but he was not the begotten son, so they don't have that belief. So you just wasted 1 hour, when they didn't. And you might even find many Christians, for example. Remember, they did surveys among the bishops of England here, and found that more than 50% of the bishops didn't believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that Jesus was God. Didn't believe that. So if the bishops have that belief, then you can imagine what is amongst the common people. So though, yes, there is an official belief line, a creed, people are still believing whatever they feel like believing. So you, as a da'i, one who is not saying, that's my 24-hour duty. No, I have different fields that I work in, etc. But I know that wherever I am, I have a duty to convey the word of Allah, as long as there's an opportunity for me to do so. So what is my approach? My approach here should be like that of a doctor. How the doctor deals with his patient. When you go in to see the doctor, does he start writing the prescription already? Before you even reach the seat? He's writing out a prescription. When you got to the seat, he just gives you the prescription, you say shukran and you leave? No. He has to hear what your problems are. He has to listen to you. Hear what is your problem. After he has understood your illness, then he prescribes the suitable remedy. And that's the same thing in da'wah. We're going to convey to them the message, but how do we convey it? It's like medicine. We have to convey it in the way which is suitable for that particular person that we are giving the da'wah to. So we need to hear what they have to say. Hear their ideas. What are their thoughts? Right? Second point to keep in mind is that you should put yourself in other people's shoes. Meaning, when you're giving da'wah, the language that you're using, stop and think. If I were a non-Muslim who knew nothing about Islam, would this have any value to me? You're giving da'wah to somebody, a non-Muslim, knows nothing about Islam, and you're quoting from the Quran. You're quoting what Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said. You're quoting what Sheikh so-and-so said. Well, this person doesn't even believe in Islam at all, has no belief in Islam. You're going to tell them, what does the Quran mean to them? Nothing. So you're quoting the Quran to them is useless. You're not putting yourself in their shoes. Now the message of the Quran, you can tell them, of course. In the course of your da'wah, the message of the Quran should be that, because when we said, calling to Allah ala basira, this means according to Quran and Sunnah and the understanding of the earlier generations. We take their understanding, but we put it in a language which is applicable to that person. So that's putting ourselves in their shoes. We should think, just stop and think for ourselves for a moment. And that's one of the important things which come up with in this line, is using the term Allah. Using the term Allah. This is something in da'wah people have debated about. Should we use the term God, or should we use the term Allah? Now, what you find is surveys which have been done among non-Muslims have shown clearly that the vast majority of them believe or think that Allah is a different God from the God they believe in. It's the God of the Muslims. Like the Hindus have Shiva, Ganesh, the Muslims have Allah. Some of them even, made articles about it. Mori did a thing about the moon god. Allah is the moon god of the Muslims. All kinds of foolishness out there. So, once you use the term Allah to somebody who has not been familiarized, has not been given an understanding, then that is going to conjure up in their minds all kinds of other images, etc., which is just going to affect your da'wah. So really, it is most effective really in giving da'wah to non-Muslims. It's better to use the term God. And you clarify who God really is. Because ultimately the God they believe in is the same God we believe in. But they have got some misconceptions about God. That He had a son, that He became a man, and a variety of other things connected to it. But we clarify those misconceptions. But it's the same God ultimately. And we need to start from that common ground with them. So again, this is the issue of putting yourself in another person's shoes, understanding how they are looking at Islam, the world of Islam, etc., in the course of giving our da'wah. We are looking at the context in which we are giving our da'wah. What are the issues that we need to keep in mind? We said there were 3 basic issues that we should start off with. Understanding whether we're trying to convert people or convey a message. We said it was really conveying the message. We said also listening before we speak. That's important. If you want to convey a message, you need to listen and know what message you should be giving, how you should be giving that message. And also, we said we should put ourselves in the shoes of others. Hear ourselves. Hear our terminologies, how we're expressing that message. Is it in a way which would encourage understanding from the non-Muslims? Or is it a way which is going to create more questions and doubts in their minds? Now, as a general principle, when we come into a new situation, we have to assess that situation. Assess it. Judge what is the circumstance that we have found ourselves in. Among the things that we need to keep in mind when we're assessing a situation is our timing. That the message has to be given at the appropriate times. Meaning that we don't try to do everything at one time. Somebody expresses some interest. I'd like to know something about Islam. You bring for them a carton of books. No, this is bad timing. Give them a pamphlet. Let them read that. After they've absorbed that information, they show further interest, you give them something else. You work with them. Don't overload. This is information overload. Bad timing. Also, what we need to keep in mind is the audience itself, the nature of the audience. And what is most important in that is what we call the group mentality. If you're talking to people as a group, they function differently from people as individuals. Meaning, if you sat and you talked with a person by themselves, they might agree with you, they might listen, and etc., etc. But then you find that same person in a group, you try to talk to them and you find that they're not. They're siding with the group. Because that is the nature of people. When you're with a group, this is what they call peer pressure. You don't want to say anything that is going to make your group look at you, negatively. So you'll go along with it, even though in your heart you agree with what the person is saying. But in that group situation, you're caught. So the da'wah in general, if you have a choice between talking to a person in a group, a student in your class, for example, there are other students around, they want to ask something about Islam, something like this, better to talk to them separately. To talk to them while their friends are around with them, then you will not get as good a response as if you talk to them by themselves. Because people are much more, because they don't feel any pressure on them there. It's much more easy for them to accept, to discuss things out without it being under the pressure of an audience. So it is important for us to know and to avoid those kind of circumstances where we can. However, there are circumstances where you can't avoid it. You've been invited to speak to a group. What do? You say, sorry, I can only speak to individuals? No, you speak to the group. You try to get some message across to them as a group. And of course it's best to use principles which will bring out their ideas. The idea of listening, because of course listen before you speak doesn't work well when you're giving a presentation to an audience. But how you can make it work for you is involve the audience in your presentation. Get them to bring out their ideas. So rather than just tell, you ask them some questions. What's your idea on that? What do you think? What have you heard? Let them give you some of their ideas so they feel a direct involvement, so you can hear some of what they're saying. Also, the location where you're giving the da'wah. You have to choose a suitable location for that